Okay, I'm Mary Trachsel. I'm from the Department of Rhetoric at the University of Iowa, and you see by my outfit that I am a choir member. And it was through the choir, I was one of the charter members of the choir, and Mary Cohen introduced a writing component to the choir, and I saw how enthusiastically people wrote, partly because it was a way to communicate with one another in the choir. We sit in sectionals. The women sit in the alto and soprano sections, the men in the tenor and bass sections, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity to talk, just to socialize with one another. So writing and sharing our writing with one another in response to writing assignments each week was one of the ways that we could get to know each other without wasting valuable rehearsal time. And it was that first semester, seeing that how people responded to that, that gave me the idea of starting a writer's workshop in the Oakdale prison. My husband actually started a nonfiction writing branch of the workshop, and I can't remember if Matt, you were there the first semester. Matt Gilchrist, one of my colleagues in the rhetoric department, is a veteran of the Writers' Workshop out there. And we had a kind of open, we had some writing assignments, but we welcomed any kind of writing that people wanted to do. And so we had a kind of free-form writing workshop. So people wrote poetry, people wrote personal reflections, people wrote advice columns. We had somebody wrote a musical. Novels. I don't know how many unfinished novels there are circulating at the Oakdale prison right now, but we had a sort of any genre, anything you want to write. And we modeled it after the choir in the sense that community members write too. So I don't know if Jen Brown is here anymore. She's also a member of the choir, but she has been a very, very faithful attendee and leader of the workshop at Oakdale. So there have been a number of people involved from the university and also from outside the university. I see Carol Tix is here from Mount Mercy. She and a graduate student of hers came and did a poetry workshop, which people really enjoyed, and they published a little booklet. You may have noticed that there is a little booklet called A Collection of Voices. This is one of the members, or actually several of the members of the workshop got together and put this together. And it contains writings that were submitted in the writing workshop over the years. I was also glad to see that I recognized one of the faces in the classes that Emily Ginther was showing us of people at Newton. So one of the former members of the choir and the Writers' Workshop managed to get his first year of college at the Newton facility. So the Writers' Workshop is it's just a volunteer organization. We do not give credit. I can't even imagine the bureaucratic red tape that we would have to go through. Another problem with long-term projects at Oakdale is that many people are not staying there very long, so it's always kind of sad for us when people who have been faithful members of the choir or the workshop move on. We feel ambivalent about that. On the one hand, we're happy that they are one step closer to being released, and on the other hand, we miss them. So just this week, we lost one of our really faithful members, and we're really going to miss him. I wanted to, I don't know exactly how much time I have, but I wanted to finish with somebody in the workshop who wrote a little bit about what the workshop and the choir, he's somebody who has been a charter member of both organizations. And he writes that before he was incarcerated, he never thought of himself as a writer. And he writes about getting a D- in his English class and just barely being able to graduate. And he said, needless to say, during the 5 years between high school and being incarcerated, I had no inclination toward writing. Now, coming to prison tends to be an eye-opening experience in many ways, and there's a torrent of emotions that come along with being ripped away from your children, family, friends, and a whole world that you thought you knew. For me, that experience was very difficult. I'd always had some trouble with my emotions, especially anger. But surprisingly, that was one of the emotions that rarely came to the surface of my tormented psyche. Sadness, hurt, and guilt at not being there for my wife and children were at the forefront of my mind. And one of the first things I did after being put into the general population was to write a couple of poems. Now, I'd never studied or really even read poetry before attempting to write these poems. But when I was about 12, my mom gave me some advice to help me control my temper. She told me to write when I was angry. It didn't matter what I wrote as long as I wrote out why I was angry and explored the reasons for my anger through the writing. Of course, I was young and thought I knew everything, and I'd only attempted it once. It did help, but when you're 12 going on rebellion, you rarely do things that actually help. But writing those poems did prove cathartic, and once I had them out, I stopped writing again. Then came the choir. I joined that because my buddy was going to it, and I enjoyed singing, but I am generally a shy person, and being in a room with 7 strangers is not a conducive atmosphere for a shy guy to sing in. So I joined the choir, a huge step for self-proclaimed nonconformist, and found an activity in which I could be one step closer to the person I was before being incarcerated, a guy jamming out to his car radio at the top of his voice. Then the writer's workshop opened, and I decided that since I'd joined one group and enjoyed that, I might as well give this one a shot. I started with writing stories from my past, things I was relatively sure I knew. But like both my parents, I'm an avid reader. My father reads horror and westerns, and my mother reads mostly romance. My tastes in books lean more towards fantasy and science fiction, so I thought I'd try my hand at writing a fantasy story for my sons. I got about 50 pages into it and stalled. And now I am now on the 3rd incarnation of that story, and I'm running into the 3rd incarnation of writer's block. During the times I took a break from that story, I went back to try my hand at poetry and discovered that through poetry I could get out ideas and feelings that had no viable outlet. The people in the writer's workshop have been more than encouraging, and they are the main reason I believe I can write. I've written more in the past 5-ish years than I ever would have dreamed possible. Because of the people at the Writers' Workshop and Choir, I've discovered that even though I'm a non-person, according to the government, I'm still a living being, and I have a voice, and that there are people willing to listen to it, and sometimes even agree with it. There are many, many opportunities out there for people to get involved in. This is a small project. We have maybe 3-4 people who go in each week, and we have, between 3 and 12 people in the workshop. It sort of expands and stretches depending on how many other activities we're competing with. But there are a lot of opportunities, and in particular, there's a need and an opportunity for people who can work with drawing. There is, in this booklet, there is a drawing that somebody did when he was what they call in the hole, which is, I guess, solitary confinement. And he drew an elaborate picture, and the idea is that writers will take this picture, get inspiration from the picture, and so there are actually 2 stories that were inspired by the picture. And they would like to start a pen and paper club that is a combination of drawing and writing. So that's something that they're really hoping that they can get a volunteer who can help them out with that. Very rewarding to meet with these people, get to know them, and to share writing with them. I have started doing writing for the workshop that, I'm not a poet, but I actually wrote a poem the other day. So, and shared it with them because I knew they would be a receptive audience. So If you're interested, there will be a session this afternoon. I'll talk more about the writing workshop. Gemma, too, is a leader in the workshop, and we couldn't do without her.